Hey guys, tonight we begin a journey that travels not across oceans or through ancient ruins, but deep into sound, silence, and the softest corners of the human experience. Imagine this headline: The Oldest Whisper, Why Ancient Voices Still Calm Our Modern Minds. We're going far beyond YouTube tonight, tracing the surprising, very real roots of a sensation millions feel, but few can explain. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the Moonlight and Sleepless television channel, and I will deliver as you wish. And as always, let me know in the comments, what city are you in and what time is it right now where you are? Now, dim the lights, and as the night stretches on, let's gently step into tonight's journey together. Long before anyone uttered the acronym ASMR, long before microphones whispered and fingernails tapped for sleepy internet audiences, human beings were using sound, touch, and gentle presence in quiet, deliberate ways. To find the real beginnings of what we now call ASMR, we need to return to a world lit by fire and oil, lamps where silence wasn't rare, but sacred. In ancient Greece, temples dedicated to healing, such as the Asclepians, weren't just about medicine, they were about atmosphere. These sanctuaries were quiet, echoing spaces where soft sounds like the rustle of robes or the trickle of water were part of the treatment. Patients underwent ritual purification, followed by dreams and whispered interpretations from temple priests. The process was slow, quiet, and deeply sensory. It was not unlike today's guided meditation or whispering voiceovers, but rooted in belief and ceremony. Across the Mediterranean, Egyptian priestesses were known to conduct rituals involving humming and soft intonation, used to lull participants into trance-like states. The frequency of the human voice, used intentionally, was seen as both spiritual and medicinal. And in the Indian subcontinent, ancient Ayurvedic practices emphasized marmotherapy, gentle pressing or tapping of specific points on the body, often accompanied by low rhythmic chanting. These practices were believed to regulate life energy and restore balance terms that sound eerily similar to how modern ASMR fans describe the tingles and relaxation they feel. What's fascinating is how often softness itself, light, soft touch, soft voice, was culturally linked to healing. Even Confucian texts make passing mention of the calming power of gentle, controlled speech. Speech, one passage notes, when like water nourishes the listener. One cold but compelling observation from historians is that while these rituals were spiritual in intent, they had neurological side effect zones we're only now beginning to understand. Calm tone, rhythmic movement, careful touch, all activate parasympathetic nervous responses, slowing heart rate, releasing dopamine, shifting the body toward rest. It seems our ancestors knew this intuitively. There's also the matter of oral storytelling, a lost art that spanned continents. Before books, before writing, knowledge was passed mouth to mouth quietly, slowly, often late at night around firelight. Anthropologists have found that in most traditional societies, storytelling took on a whispering cadence when the subject was sacred, sad, or meant to soothe children or the sick. Even today, ASMR creators replicate this exact tone. Coincidence? Some scholars argue not. Now here's something that surprises even the most curious researchers. In early Chinese Han Dynasty sleep rituals, it was customary for court attendants to murmur verses or recite records of dreams to nobles as they drifted off to sleep. These were real people trained to speak softly, without inflection, for the sole purpose of soothing. It was a role respected and paid. In a sense, they were the earliest ASM artists, working long before ring lights and binaural mics. Yet, despite these rich histories, academic consensus has never fully formed around the origins of sensory relaxation through voice and touch. Some say these rituals were merely cultural expressions, with no physiological basis. Others argue these early practices form a missing link in understanding how we instinctively use calm sound to create safety. As one researcher put it, there is a lineage to ASMR just doesn't use that name. So while the term is new, the feeling is ancient. ASMR didn't begin with earbuds, and soft-spoken YouTuber Sit began with temple shadows, whispered myths, and the simple, sacred human instinct to quiet another soul. The journey of soft sensations continued into a very different time of corsets, gaslight, and growing curiosity about the strange workings of the human mind. We're now in the 19th century, the era of scientific salons, mesmerists, and spiritual seances, where fascination with the nervous system and hidden senses was at an all-time high. Though the word ASMR was still centuries away, its shadow was already taking form in the language of the age. Nervous thrills, pleasure shivers, aesthetic chills. In Victorian England, people wrote extensively about strange physical sensations linked to emotion or attention. One popular phrase was frisson, a French loanword used in both literature and early psychology to describe a pleasant shiver or tingling that could be triggered by music, poetry, or even a gentle voice. These were not imagined feelings. They were considered a real part of the sensory experience, even if science had no name for the cause. The poet Alfred, Lord Tennyson, once described his own technique of inducing a trance-like calm by silently repeating his own name in a whisper until he entered a state of what he called pure consciousness. If that sounds eerily similar to today's ASMR, self-trigger techniques, well, it is. Even Charles Darwin, in his notes on emotional expression, described how certain tones or movements could provoke a full-body response, a thrill along the spine, he wrote. And here's something especially interesting. In the salons of Vienna and London, it became fashionable to undergo neurological demonstrations. These were part theater, part science performed by early neurologists and hypnotists. A physician would guide a volunteer through a series of spoken commands, finger movements, and tapping rhythms, often in front of an elite audience. Descriptions from attendees often mention a sense of calm, warmth, and a peculiar tingling, as if my whole skin were alert. These performances weren't just medical, they were sensory experiences. Sound familiar? One of the most influential and controversial figures of the time was Franz Mesmer, the man whose name gave rise to the term mesmerize. Though Mesmer lived in the late 18th century, his influence peaked in the 19th. He believed in a universal fluid that could be manipulated through passes of the hands, touch, and soft vocal command. Patients would enter a dreamy state, often accompanied by tears, chills, or total relaxation. While his theories were eventually discredited, Mesmer's techniques, hand movements, slow speech, and focused attention bear a strange resemblance to the visual and vocal patterns in ASMR videos today. Even more striking were the so-called swoon sessions held in private parlors. These were small social gatherings where guests would be blindfolded and exposed to a series of whispered poems, soft brushings, or the sound of lace-gloved fingers tapping porcelain. The goal? Induce a state of pleasurable stillness. Some thought it was spiritual. Some thought it was medical. Some just thought it felt good. Yet, this wasn't limited to Europe. In America, Shaker communities and Quaker meditation circles emphasized soft chanting, silence, and quiet hand motions to center the spirit. They believed in the power of simplicity, and sound played a key role. It wasn't about religion alone. It was about calming the nervous system, making peace with silence. What's worth noting is that throughout the 19th century, there existed a deep interest in the space between medicine and mystery. The human body was being mapped with increasing precision, but certain feelings, those subtle, hard-to-define sensations, remained outside the scope of diagnosis. This is precisely why ASMR still raises eyebrows today. Academic institutions in the 1800s often dismissed these soft sciences as female hysteria or emotional eccentricity, terms loaded with gender bias and ignorance. And even now, many people hesitate to admit they watch ASMR for fear of sounding weird. Yet we see clear evidence. People, then as now, were seeking safe spaces for soft sensations. The difference? Today we have microphones. Back then, they had tea parlors, salons, and velvet curtain seances. Some historians argue that ASMR is not a new trend, but a continuation of a very old pattern, the cultural need for sensory intimacy. The academic world hasn't quite agreed. Some still label it as pseudoscience, a placebo, but others, neuroscientists, media scholars, psychologists, are beginning to look again, more carefully this time. In the end, the 19th century gave us a preview that behind the stiff collars and rigid rules, there were moments quiet, deliberate, whispered. When people touched that same shiver, we now chase with headphones and lo-fi whispers. As the 20th century dawned, humanity entered an age obsessed with progress, industry, and scientific authority, but quietly, in laboratories and private clinics, experiments were underway that would unknowingly echo the essence of ASMR. This chapter takes us to a time when machines hummed, electricity was magic, and human touch was being redefined through wires, magnets, and gentle pulses. In the early 1900s, scientists and doctors were fascinated by the human body's response to electrotherapy treatment that involved mild electrical currents applied to the skin. Though its use spanned from pain relief to psychological treatment, what drew particular interest were the subjective reports from patients. Many described a calming sensation that started at the base of the skull and traveled down the spine. One patient in a Berlin clinic in 1911 reportedly called the sensation a quiet river moving through me. This idea that a localized stimulus could produce a whole-body reaction mirrors almost perfectly what many described during ASMR experiences. The difference? Back then, they were using wires and static. Today, it's the rustle of paper or a whispered voice. But the pattern is astonishingly consistent. Small inputs, deep responses. But electrotherapy wasn't the only avenue of sensory exploration. During the same period, magnetism was gaining traction as a quasi-medical tool. While many claims were debunked, the experiences people had during magnetic passes, especially in France and Austria often, included sensations of calm, stillness, and what they called neurological delight. The magnets, lightly brushed near the face or neck, weren't effective in a clinical sense, but they seemed to shift attention inward, quieting the mind. One lesser-known figure, Dr. Delphine Meunier, worked in Lyon in the 1920s and published an obscure but intriguing pamphlet on the therapeutic value of whispered instruction. In it, she detailed her clinical success with anxious children by using hushed tones, deliberate pacing, and rhythmic speech. She wrote, "It is not what I say, but the softness with which I say it that seems to open their attention like a flower." This work was dismissed at the time, overshadowed by louder breakthroughs in psychiatry, but today, her insights sound remarkably similar to ASMR practitioners' techniques. In parallel, tactile therapy was also evolving. Techniques like cranial massage, light brushing, and aura work began appearing in alternative health circles, often dismissed by mainstream science, but adored by those who experienced them. Reports frequently mention tingles, tranquility, and the feeling of being deeply seen. Sound familiar? Even in the world of early education, a shift was happening. Progressive educators like Maria Montessori emphasized the power of gentle, repetitive actions to calm and engage children's attention-folding cloth, tapping gently on wood, whispering words during lessons. Montessori classrooms were designed not just to teach, but to soothe. Her belief that quiet activities build quiet minds now finds an echo in the aesthetics of ASMR videos that emphasize slow, intentional movement and sound. An intriguing footnote comes from early film archives. In a few silent films from the 1920s, directors would sometimes show characters engaged in detailed, slow handwork sewing, brushing hair, polishing shoes with long, uninterrupted shots. These sequences, oddly hypnotic, were said to make viewers feel entranced. Without knowing it, cinema may have become one of the first mass mediums to broadcast ASMR-adjacent experiences even before sound entered the picture. But as the century progressed, this soft world of subtle sensations was pushed aside. The rise of pharmaceuticals, behaviorism, and technological rationalism in the mid-20th century left little room for whispering doctors or therapeutic magnets. The scientific mood shifted toward measurable outcomes, not mysterious feelings. And yet, even in this clinical age, something persisted. In the quiet corners of care homes, schools, and salons, people still responded to soft tones, slow gestures, and focused attention. The tools changed, the impulse didn't. Today, when researchers look back on this era, they often point out how many sensory therapies were discarded before they were truly understood. Some speculate we missed an opportunity to explore the full landscape of human sensory response, favoring machines over mindfulness, volume over vibration. In truth, ASMR didn't vanish in the 20th century, it simply went underground, woven into the edges of therapy, education, and early media, waiting, softly, for a new world to listen. By the middle of the 20th century, households around the world were tuning in to an entirely new kind of entertainment television. It was bright, it was noisy, it was fast, and yet, every so often, something quiet slipped through the static. Something unintentional, unnoticed by most except for a few people who, as they watched, felt something strange. A pleasant tingling at the back of their necks, a calm that washed over them. Decades later, these same people would describe those moments in surprisingly specific detail. They hadn't heard of ASMR, but they had felt it. Among the most commonly cited triggers from that era were moments of soft-spoken instruction like the now iconic educational series, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Fred Rogers, with his slow cadence, deliberate hand movements, and warm, unwavering tone, became an unintentional ASMR pioneer. He didn't rush. He tied his shoes slowly. He opened packages quietly. He looked directly at the camera, making the viewer feel seen and safe. Generations of children remember feeling inexplicably calm, watching Mr. Rogers explain how crayons are made or how a mailbox works. He wasn't just talking to them. He was creating a one-on-one sensory relationship, something many ASMR creators today carefully emulate. Some researchers believe this emotional intimacy, paired with repetitive, detail-focused behavior, is the ideal environment for ASMR. But Fred Rogers wasn't alone. Across the ocean, the BBC aired Watch with Mother, a series of gentle British children's programs with names like Andy Pandy and the Wooden Tops, full of soft voices, slow puppet movement, and musical lullabies. While not designed as ASMR, these programs produced in viewers the same effecta, drowsy, delighted attention. Another unexpected source of calm came from instructional programming, sewing shows, cooking demos, and even home repair segments. These weren't glamorous broadcasts. They were quiet, task-focused, and often featured hosts who whispered more than they spoke. One show from the late 1970s, The Art of Calligraphy, gained a cult following not for its educational value, but for the soft, hypnotic scratching of nib on parchment and the slow, deliberate speech of its host. Viewers didn't know why they liked it. They just knew it made them feel good. And then there was Bob Ross. In the 1980s and 1990s, The Joy of Painting aired on public television stations across the United States. Bob Ross spoke in a whispery tone, used phrases like happy little trees, and made calm, repetitive brushstrokes that created not just art, but atmosphere. Millions found his presence profoundly relaxing, even if they had no intention of painting. Decades later, ASMR fans would crown him one of the genre's honorary forefathers. The most remarkable thing? None of these people knew what they were triggering. They weren't trying to create brain tingles. They were just being gentle, slow, and attentive. 3 traits we now understand as deeply ASMR-inducing. Academic researchers have started to look back on this era with fresh eyes. Some argue that the popularity of such soft media was a subconscious counterbalance to the growing speed and volume of modern life. As cities got louder, schedules tighter, and information faster, viewers sought out the few moments of quiet they could find even if they didn't know why. Interestingly, some of the most enduring ASMR triggers today are based on those same formats. The sound of brushing, soft speaking, tapping, instruction, eye contact, and deliberate movement. Many ASM artists say they were inspired not by the term ASMR, but by memories watching their grandmother fold laundry, a librarian turning pages, or a teacher demonstrating how to sharpen a pencil. These are the echoes of mid-century media, passed from generation to generation like lullabies. But there's a quiet debate among historians and media scholars about whether these shows were intentionally soothing or just accidentally perfect for relaxation. Some argue that public broadcasting, with its slower pacing and lack of commercial breaks, naturally fostered this calm style. Others suggest that some producers did notice the viewer response and leaned into it subtly, knowing they had found something special. What is certain is this: long before the word ASMR existed, the world was already creating it through vinyl, static, velvet voices, and camera shots that lingered just a second longer than necessary. As we stepped into the 1990s and early 2000s, something subtle and unprecedented began to happen. The internet gave people permission to say things out loud that they'd always kept quietly to themselves. And among these quiet confessions, one in particular began to surface again and again. Does anyone else get a tingly feeling when someone talks softly, or does something really carefully? It started on forums, in comment sections, on strange little message boards. No one knew what to call it yet. People described the same thing: a pleasant tingling at the back of the head, a wave of calm, a deeply relaxed, almost trance-like state. The trigger? Seemingly mundane things. A classmate whispering during a test, watching someone fold towels, a gentle voice on the other end of a helpline. One of the earliest and most telling examples came from a post in a 2007 thread on steadyhealth.com, where a user described a sensation triggered by a friend drawing for her in silence. Dozens of others replied, expressing similar feelings, often with surprise or relief. "I thought I was the only one," was a common refrain. This marked the first collective realization that this soft neurological sensation wasn't a quirk, it was shared. But without a name, it lived in whispers, much like the feeling itself. The early internet, pre-social media, pre-algorithm, was a strange and fertile ground for such ideas. It was still a space for anonymous wonderings, and the idea of an intimate, soothing experience being discussed openly felt revolutionary. Users built lists of their triggers: whispering, hair brushing, tapping, crinkling wrappers, the sound of typing, careful hand movements. But the science hadn't caught up yet. Neither had the language. Some posters even linked their sensation to older moments, writing things like, "When I was little, I used to love it. When the school nurse would whisper while checking my temperature, it made me feel dreamy, like I was somewhere else." Others referenced teachers writing on chalkboards, librarians flipping pages, or watching makeup tutorials on low volume. Commonplace actions, yet clearly, emotionally, and physically significant. What's fascinating is that most of these people weren't looking for entertainment. They were looking for relief from stress, insomnia, loneliness. In that way, the proto-ASMR community was a support group before it was a fandom. Historians and digital anthropologists now see this as a rare case of a new sensory phenomenon being identified from the bottom up, not by scientists in labs, but by individuals sharing anecdotal fragments until a pattern emerged. No institution labeled ASMR. The people did. Some researchers believe this self-discovery was made possible by the nature of early web culture itself: more patient, more text-based, and deeply personal. These early posts weren't about virality. They were about connection. which makes it even more poignant that for years no one had a term for what they felt. Some called it head tingles. Others just said, that feeling. And here's where things get even more interesting. While the term synesthesiatha, blending of senses, was well known, and frisson was associated with music chills, neither fully described what this was. ASMR didn't have the urgency of a chill or the cross-sensory quality of synesthesia. It was quieter, deeper, more internal. As one user wrote, "It's like my brain is exhaling." Even now, scholars debate how to classify ASMR. Is it a cognitive state, a reflex, a psychological phenomenon? Some neuroscientists believe it overlaps with affective touch, a branch of sensory neuroscience that studies how certain gentle touches, like a slow stroke on the forearm, communicate emotional connection, not just physical contact. It's part of how humans bond. But back in those early internet years, this was still underground. There were no microphones set to whisper, no lo-fi filters, no role-play videos, just people asking, does anyone else feel this? And slowly, very slowly, the answer was yes. That era-quiet, chaotic curiosus, now seen as the pre-dawn of the ASMR movement, a time when the internet became not just a mirror, but a microphone for our most delicate inner experiences. By 2009, the whisper had a name. It wasn't born in a lab or christened by a research error. It was coined by a woman named Jennifer Allen, a cybersecurity specialist who had experienced the tingling sensation all her life. She, like so many others, had been searching online for a way to describe it. When she realized the experience had no name, she decided to create one herself. Autonomous Sensory Meridian Response. Each word was chosen deliberately. Autonomous, to emphasize that the experience arises without conscious effort. Sensory, because it involves the senses primarily hearing and sight. Meridian, a word borrowed from acupuncture and energy healing, used here to suggest a peak or flow of sensation. And response, to highlight that it's a reaction, not an action. Together, ASMR. The moment this term hit the internet, it spread not like wildfire, but like mist, quietly, gradually. But it changed everything. Now that it had a name, the sensation could be searched, shared, studied. Reddit communities sprang up, message boards became hubs, and early YouTube creators who had been posting whisper or tapping videos with no framework suddenly realized what they were doing had a word. One of the earliest YouTube videos, now considered classic ASMR, wasn't intended that way. It was a woman calmly folding towels and speaking softly about her day. It had no background music, no flashy graphics, just warmth, rhythm, and the kind of focused care that invites the brain to slow down. Viewers began to comment, "This gave me ASMR." The video creator had never heard the term before. The first wave of self-aware ASMR creators appeared around this time. Many of them were simply experimenting, whispering into low-quality microphones, brushing their hair on camera, tapping on mugs. Some wore no makeup, spoke directly to the camera, and uploaded without edits. It was raw, intimate, and deeply human. These early videos weren't slick or polished, but they shared a common spirit, intentional gentleness. One of the breakthrough creators, known by the screen name Gentle Whispering, began posting in 2011. Her calm demeanor, Russian accent, and caring tone quickly made her one of the most watched ASMR channels. Viewers didn't just comment on the tingles, they talked about falling asleep easier, feeling less alone, feeling cared for. The intimacy of the content became the content itself. It was around this time that Roleplay ASMR began to take shop a creator pretending to be a doctor, a librarian, a friend. Not in the theatrical sense, but in soft, mundane situations, checking your ears, helping you choose a book, asking if you've had enough water today. These scenarios were grounded in attentive care, simulating the feeling of being tended to. For many, especially those dealing with anxiety or insomnia, this style became deeply therapeutic. But even as ASMR gained popularity, it remained misunderstood. Journalists often framed it as a weird internet thing. Some asked if it was erotic. Others dismissed it as digital quirk. But for those in the community, it felt more like self-soothing meets digital intimacia, kind of emotional housekeeping they could return to night after night. Researchers took notice, slowly. A few pioneering scientists began conducting small-scale studies, most notably at Swansea University in the UK, exploring the link between ASMR and reduced heart rate. Preliminary findings suggested ASMR could reduce stress levels in ways similar to meditation or mindfulness. Still, the academic world was cautious. ASMR didn't fit neatly into existing categories. It wasn't Frissons, which was fast, sharp, emotional, and it wasn't quite hypnosis or guided meditation. It was something else, soft, slow, specific. The science hadn't caught up with the sensation, and there was another complexity. Not everyone feels ASMR. Some people report never experiencing it, no matter what trigger they try. This divides researchers. Some believe ASMR sensitivity may be neurological, linked to social cognition or mirror neurons. Others argue it's more about attention and mood, how open the viewer is to letting go. But back in the community, the debates didn't matter. What mattered was that for the first time, people could say ASMR and be understood. A feeling that once had no voice had found millions. And through this gentle revolution, video by video, whisper by whisper, the internet became the quietest room in the world. Once the term ASMR entered public consciousness, a wave of experimentation began. In bedrooms, closets, and makeshift studios around the world, a new kind of creator was being born, part performer, part caretaker, part scientist. These early ASM artists weren't following a trend. They were exploring an unfamiliar language of sound, gesture, and intimacy. It was a global soft-spoken experiment happening in real time. At first, the formats were simple: whispered monologues, light tapping on common objects, page turning. But soon the genre began to diversify. Creators began testing what sounds triggered the most consistent tingles, how long to pause, how to move their hands in frame, how close to speak into the mic. A community of hobbyists became a collective of unofficial neurologists, tuning into the brain's quietest buttons. A major shift came with Roleplay ASMR, which turned out to be far more than theater. Creators began taking on characters: a spa therapist, a kind doctor, a caring friend on a rainy evening. These weren't melodramatic scenes. They were carefully controlled experiences, designed to simulate attention, safety, and one-on-one care. What was once considered a basic whisper video now evolved into immersive, tender rituals. One creator, known online as Whispers Red, began exploring the idea of ASMR not just as entertainment, but as emotional support. In one video, she plays a school nurse checking in on the viewer. The gestures are familiar, the speech is slow and considerate, but the experience feels strangely personal, even healing. For viewers, it was more than tingles. It was a feeling of being noticed. Another turning point came with the discovery that sound quality mattered deeply. Enter binaural microphones equipment designed to mimic the way humans hear with two ears. When used properly, it creates the illusion that the creator is sitting right beside you, speaking just over your shoulder or tapping gently near your ear. Suddenly, ASMR was no longer a video. It was a space-private, immersive, three-dimensional. This intimacy was amplified by the fact that most people watched ASMR at night, in bed, often with headphones. The ritual of lying down, turning off the lights, and letting someone whisper kindly into your ears became, for many, a form of digital caregiving. At the same time, the comment sections of ASMR videos became their own kind of community. People shared why they were there: stress, insomnia, heartbreak, or just the need to feel calm in a noisy world. Unlike most internet spaces, these comment sections were unusually gentle. People thanked creators. They expressed vulnerability. They shared memories of grandmothers, quiet classrooms, or the soft-spoken teacher who made them feel safe. In this corner of the web, tenderness was the norm. What many didn't realize at the time was that this was also a neuro-emotional laboratory. ASMR creators were using themselves as instruments adjusting voice pitch, pacing, camera angle, light level, while closely watching feedback. Too fast. That sound was perfect. Please do the crinkling again. The audience wasn't just passive. They were co-designing the experience. But this openness also led to questions. Some viewers began requesting role plays that treaded into complex emotional territory. Breakups, grief, caretaking of the terminally ill. Creators had to make choices. Were they performers or surrogate companions? What lines shouldn't be crossed? Academic observers began to take note. One media studies professor called ASMR videos the gentlest form of participatory media ever created. Another dubbed it ambient empathy. Still, others warned that emotional realism without boundaries could become problematic for vulnerable viewers. To this day, ASMR's identity as comfort or performance remains a point of discussion. There's also been fascinating speculation in the scientific community about why roleplay works so well. Some researchers suggest it activates the brain's default mode network, which processes empathy, memory, and social bonding. When a soft-spoken stranger calls you sweetheart and asks how your day was, your brain might not know it's a video. It reacts like someone is caring for you. Yet, despite the emotional weight these videos often carry, ASMR remains lo-fi, small-scale, humble in its production. There are no soundtracks, no flashy intros. Just a microphone, a camera, and a voice that refuses to shout. The early 2010s were the quiet boom of ASMR. A digital whispering revolution, spreading across continents, languages, and devices not with noise, but with presence. And even as creators grew bolder and platforms expanded, the essence remained the same. One voice, one listener, and a space where stillness finally felt safe again. By now, millions had clicked. Whispers were streamed across the globe, and the word Tingles was no longer confined to niche message. Board sit was part of the mainstream vocabulary. But the question became louder. Why does ASMR work the way it does? And perhaps more interestingly, why do so many people crave it? Enter the psychologists, neuroscientists, and cognitive researchers. For the first time, labs began to examine ASMR, not as internet oddity, but as a phenomenon worth studying. One of the earliest formal studies came in 2015, when researchers at Swansea University surveyed over 400 participants. The findings were quietly remarkable. A majority reported that ASMR helped them reduce stress and anxiety, fall asleep faster, and even ease symptoms of chronic pain. The most common triggers? Whispering, personal attention, crisp sounds, and slow hand movements. This research began mapping the physiological effects of ASMR. When people watched trigger videos, their heart rates dropped significantly up to 3.4 beats per minute in some cases. That's a similar decrease seen in light meditation. Yet, curiously, their skin conductance increased, meaning they were relaxed, but also alert a paradoxical state described by many ASMR fans as deep calm with focused presence. Then came the brain scans. In 2018, a team at Dartmouth College used functional MRI technology to compare the brains of ASMR-sensitive individuals with those who didn't experience it. They found stronger activity in regions tied to social bonding and self-awareness, such as the medial prefrontal cortex. Some researchers believe this supports the theory that ASMR simulates social closeness, even if it's through a screen. In short, your brain thinks someone is caring for you. What's especially fascinating is the overlap between ASMR and affective toucha term in neuroscience, referring to the kind of touch we associate with affection and safety, like a slow stroke across the arm, or a mother's hand brushing a child's hair. These kinds of stimuli activate specific nerve fibers, called C-tactile afferents, which are wired to convey emotion, not information. ASMR seems to activate the same pathways without any physical contact. But the research is still in its early stages. There's no universal ASMR gene. Not everyone experiences it. Some feel nothing at all. Others feel intense pleasure, and some even feel mild discomfort. This variability continues to puzzle scientists. Some suggest it's connected to personality traits. ASMR-sensitive individuals often score higher in openness to experience and emotional empathy. Another area of study involves neurodivergent individuals, including those with autism and ADHD. Some early findings suggest that ASMR can help regulate sensory processing, reduce over-arousal, or offer a focused calm in overstimulating environments. Though this research is ongoing, many neurodivergent viewers have already adopted ASMR as part of their self-care routines. In clinical psychology, ASMR is also being explored as a non-invasive tool for managing sleep disorders, anxiety, and even PTSD. One small pilot study found that veterans who experienced ASMR reported fewer nightmares and greater sleep satisfaction after regular exposure to ASMR content. Still, academic institutions are cautious. Most studies remain small, and funding is limited. This hesitation reflects a broader debate. Is ASMR a wellness tool or an entertainment trend? Is it closer to meditation, or to watching your favorite show before bed. The truth, as researchers are beginning to admit, might be both. Meanwhile, platforms like YouTube and Spotify noticed the numbers. ASMR content was generating billions of views and hours of watch time, often with no music, no drama, no scandal, just brushes, whispers, and the rustle of paper. It didn't matter that science hadn't caught up. Audiences already had. There's something profoundly democratic about ASMR's popularity. You don't need expensive equipment to benefit. You don't need a therapist or a diagnosis or a prescription. You just need headphones and the willingness to slow down. Academic journals still debate terminology. Some prefer audio-induced euphoria. Others push for contextual relaxation response. But the community already has its answer. It feels good, it helps, and that's enough. In a world that rewards speed, volume, and hyperstimulation, ASMR offers a quiet rebellion that's measured not in adrenaline spikes, but in slowed heartbeats and the soft rustle of calm returning. As the science cautiously circled the phenomenon, another force moved in with far less hesitation capital. By the late 2010s, brands and marketers had begun to notice something unusual. People were willingly watching and even rewinding long videos of crinkling packaging, softly whispered explanations, and slow, deliberate product interactions. The conclusion came quickly. ASMR wasn't just entertainment, it was attention. And in the age of digital advertising, attention is the most valuable currency of all. The first major moment of ASMR going mainstream commercial came during the 2019 Super Bowl, when Michelob Ultra aired a 30-second ad featuring actress Zoe Kravitz tapping gently on a beer bottle, whispering into a binaural mic, and pouring beer with cinematic slowness. Millions watched. Some were confused, others were delighted, and a very specific corner of the internet thought, finally, they get it. The ad wasn't just unique because of its style, it was silent by Super Bowl standards, and in that silence, it demanded focus. It was a test. Could asthma techniques hold viewers' attention better than high-octane stunts? The answer was a quiet yes. Soon after, brands across industries began incorporating ASMR elements. Skincare companies filmed tutorials in a whisper. Food and beverage companies leaned into the satisfying crunch of pickles, fizz of soda, or the subtle sounds of cooking. Even luxury brands released campaigns with velvet voices, slow pans, and immersive soundscapes. The logic was simple. If consumers relaxed, they stayed longer. If they stayed longer, they remembered more. But this raised an important question. Could something so personal, so fragile, survive commercialization? The ASMR community responded with mixed feelings. Some creators embraced the change, partnering with brands to produce sponsored content that still aligned with their style. Others worried that ASMR would become another buzzword, drained of meaning and subtlety. Whispers turned into taglines. Tingles became tools. Still, the numbers didn't lie. On platforms like Spotify, ASMR audio tracks began to rival traditional sleep sounds. Entire playlists emerged. No music, just brushing sounds, soft murmurs, ambient taps. Major sleep and wellness apps like Calm and Headspace quietly added ASMR-like experiences to their offerings, often without explicitly naming them. Meanwhile, TikTok exploded with a new generation of ASMR creators, some sincere, others ironic, but all playing with the genre in real time. ASMR evolved into mini videos. Fast triggers, close-up mic tapping, whispered affirmations in 30-second doses. Some users used ASMR to cope with stress during the pandemic. Others simply found it addictive, a ritual before bed. But on TikTok, the vibe changeless, meditative, more performative. Scholars now debate whether ASMR's entry into the commercial world dilutes or deepens its cultural value. One media sociologist framed it this way: ASMR began as a form of self-soothing. In the marketplace, it becomes strategic empathy. That is, the tools of ASMR soft voice, slowness, attentiveness are repurposed to build trust and intimacy in branding, often mimicking human care. In some ways, this isn't new. Advertisements have always used calming voices, rhythmic pacing, and emotionally charged soundscapes. But with ASMR, the line between care and commerce grows thin. When a whisper is selling you a product, is it still soothing or is it manipulation? Yet here's the twist. Viewers seem to know this, and in many cases, they don't mind. As long as the video triggers that sensation, slows their breath, relaxes their shoulders, they're willing to go along. One viewer commented under a sponsored ASMR skincare video, "I don't even use this product. I just like how she describes it." This opens the door to a new kind of advertising, one that trades excitement for stillness, urgency for presence. It challenges the assumption that louder is better. It hints at a deeper truth, that people are increasingly craving softness in all things seven in the things they're being sold. Some brands have gone further, designing physical products with ASMR in mind. Packaging that crinkles just right, boxes with magnetic closures, textured surfaces made to be stroked. It's designed by sensation and acknowledgement that sound, touch, and attention matter more than ever. And so ASMR, born from anonymous forums and whispery videos, has found its way into the fabric of commerce, not as noise, but as a softness threaded into the seams of the digital world. It's not without compromise, but perhaps it was inevitable. In a world trained to shout, the quietest voice sometimes becomes the most memorable. What began as a niche internet subculture had, by the early 2020s, become something entirely unexpected. Mainstream. ASMR was no longer just a collection of whispery. YouTube video sit had become a genre, a language, even a mood, crossing platforms, industries, and cultural divides. But how exactly did this softest of trends make the leap from fringe to familiar? In part, it happened because people began using ASMR without even realizing it. Podcasts with intentionally low, soothing voices. Study music channels incorporating gentle tapping and ambient movement. TikTok creators running brushes over their cameras while giving life advice. ASMR had bled into content so seamlessly that it no longer needed to be named, was just there, in the way someone slowed their speech or softened a sound. One of the most significant signs of this transition was the arrival of ASMR on Netflix. In 2021, the streaming giant released a series called Headspace Guide to Sleep, narrated in a calming, whisper-adjacent voice, paired with slow visuals and minimalist sound design. Though never explicitly labeled ASMR, its creators admitted it was informed by ASMR techniques. Sleep, calm, stillness. These became the new frontier of attention. Meanwhile, platforms like Spotify and Audible saw a surge in ASMR uploads, pure audio files designed to be played in the background of anxious nights or silent commutes. What once required video now became portable. There were ASMR bedtime stories, whispered news recaps, even entire audiobooks read in slow, breathy tones. And then came the rise of professional-grade ASMR. Creators who had started with phones and closet blankets upgraded to binaural rigs, soundproof booths, 4K video. Some filmed in actual clinics, recreating eye exams or cranial nerve tests with cinematic accuracy. Others embraced creative storytelling producing narrative, ASMR experiences that blended soft roleplay with fantasy, science fiction, or psychological drama. What might have once seemed ridiculous, a whispered space opera, for instance, became immersive and surprisingly intimate. Viewers were no longer just looking for tingles. They were looking for escape, storytelling, connection. ASMR was evolving into a sensory cinema. This shift also opened the doors for new demographics. Older adults began turning to ASMR for sleep aid, children for stress regulation. Even therapists and mental health advocates began recommending specific videos to patients not as treatment, but as adjunct support for anxiety, insomnia, and emotional regulation. In educational settings, some teachers discovered that ASMR-style narration helped neurodivergent students stay calm and attentive. A few instructors even incorporated quiet sound work into lessons, especially for virtual classrooms during the pandemic. Suddenly, the line between ASMR and applied emotional design was blurring. But this cultural mainstreaming didn't come without tension. Some long-time ASMR creators felt the original intimacy was being lost in the flood of fast-trending videos and parody content. On platforms like TikTok, ASMR was increasingly used for humor or satire, fake role plays, exaggerated mouth sounds, or chaotic ASMR that intentionally broke the calm. It was a double-edged sword, greater exposure, but also greater misunderstanding. There's also the academic debate that continues today. Has ASMR become a cultural aesthetic, or is it still a neurological response? One media researcher described ASMR as a digital folk practice of care, a way people build parasocial intimacy in an era of disconnection. Another called it the sonic version of eye contact, a phrase that lingers long after you hear it. What is undeniable is that ASMR has tapped into a collective need. In a world of overstimulation, aggression, and speed, it offers slowness, safety, and softness. It doesn't shout for attention, it offers its presence and lets you come to it. For many, this is its power, the permission to relax without explanation, and the numbers support it. ASMR videos have accumulated billions of views. Entire categories exist now. ASMR for studying, ASMR for heartbreak, ASMR for grief. It's no longer just about sensation. It's about contextual comfort. Some scholars suggest this reflects a larger trend, the rise of slow media content that invites stillness instead of reaction, that values emotional atmosphere over plot. ASMR fits perfectly into this emerging genre. It's a protest against noise, but also a celebration of the unnoticed. The rustle of pages, the scratch of a pencil, the human voice, not raised, but lowered, just for you. So, while the microphones have gotten better and the reach has grown wider, the core hasn't changed. ASMR remains what it always was, a whisper across a distance that somehow still makes you feel close. As ASMR continued to weave itself into the cultural mainstream, a quieter movement emerged inside the movement itself, a return to its roots. Amid the crystal-clear audio, high-definition role-plays, and viral experimentation, a number of creators and viewers began to crave something simpler: authenticity, imperfection, and care that felt real. This return wasn't nostalgic. It was a recognition that, at its heart, ASMR wasn't about performance, it was about presence. And so, quietly, the subgenre of lo-fi ASMR began to rise again. Lo-fi didn't mean low quality. It meant low barrier. Phone cameras, natural lighting, ambient sounds in the background, a cat meowing, a car passing outside, a breath caught between words. These imperfections didn't ruin the experience. They enhanced it. Viewers often commented, "This feels like a real person talking to me, not a character." Creators like Softly Galoshes and Be Brave BU ASMR embraced this stripped-down style, whispering unscripted stories, journaling on camera, or simply talking through the day's emotions. There was something magnetic in this unguarded softness, the kind that didn't try to induce tingles, but often triggered them anyway. This evolution mirrored a growing idea in the ASMR community, that emotional safety can be as triggering as sound. When someone makes you feel calm, seen, and accepted, your nervous system responds, whether or not a brush is involved. That, too, is ASMR. Parallel to this, the community also began to diversify across languages, cultures, and lived experiences. ASMR, though initially dominated by English-speaking creators, soon found vibrant communities in Korean, Russian, Spanish, Japanese, Arabic, and countless others. Each brought their own textures and triggers, traditional instruments, language, specific honorifics, culturally rooted gestures. In South Korea, for instance, the ASMR trend aligned with a phenomenon called healing content videos, designed to be emotionally restorative. Korean ASMR videos often emphasize respectful tone, orderly movements, and aesthetic harmony, influenced by concepts like sun mat, the hand taste, or feeling of a mother's care in homemade food. In Japan, ASMR sometimes took the form of mimicry of everyday politeness: shop clerks, train conductors, or restaurant servers. These role plays weren't ironic. They were about ritualized reassurance, the comfort of social norms performed slowly and softly. Meanwhile, creators from indigenous, Black, and disabled communities began carving out space in the ASMR world to explore representation and care through sound. Some produced whisper videos about cultural history. Others created soothing content that spoke to chronic illness, fatigue, or grief topics, rarely featured in mainstream wellness media. This was ASMR not just as relaxation, but as inclusion. And perhaps most profoundly, ASMR emerged as a new language of care for those without access to traditional forms of support. For people in long-term illness, isolation, or mental health crises, ASMR became a way to simulate moments of intimacy that the body or mind couldn't otherwise receive. One video, titled "You're Not Alone Tonight," featured nothing more than a voice whispering gentle affirmations for 30 minutes. It garnered hundreds of thousands of views. The comments were a testament to what this medium had become. One read, "I'm watching this in a hospital room. I haven't had a visitor in 4 days. This helped more than you'll ever know." Another said, "I didn't know I needed someone to say these words until I heard them." These moments are reminders that while ASMR often exists in the realm of sound, its deeper terrain is emotional resonance. It may look like tapping, brushing, or soft speech, but underneath it's about reassurance, about presence, about quietly saying, "I'm here, and so are you." Academics have started calling this genre compassion media content, created not just to entertain, but to soothe, to validate, to emotionally accompany. Some speculate ASMR is the beginning of a new kind of digital communication where connection doesn't need urgency or volume to be meaningful. In a world increasingly defined by speed and spectacle, this soft return to realness felt revolutionary. Not because it was flashy, but because it refused to be. With ASMR now a widely recognized part of digital life, its presence has begun quietly reshaping more than just entertainment. It's altering how we think about care, connection, and even presence itself in a technological world. We now live in an age where artificial intelligence and automation increasingly fill the spaces once held by human interaction. Virtual assistants book our appointments. Chatbots respond to emotional distress. Social media offers curated connection. And amid all this noise, ASMR has remained stubbornly human. What makes ASMR different from these other digital interfaces is its deliberate slowness. It doesn't solve problems. It doesn't optimize time. It doesn't give instant answers. Instead, it offers presence, someone sitting with you softly, without asking for anything in return. And this, in many ways, may be why ASMR feels so radical. It's one of the few forms of digital media that prioritizes emotional tone over task. It's not transactional, it's relational. We see this playing out in unexpected places. In telemedicine, for example, some psychologists have begun experimenting with ASMR-style voice tone and pacing during video therapy sessions to help patients feel more at ease. In user experience design, companies are considering how sound and gesture can create calming interfaces. Think gentle click sounds, warm audio feedback, or onboarding videos with ASMR-influenced narration. Even in virtual reality, ASMR has found a place. Some creators are now producing immersive VR experiences where viewers sit in a cozy digital space, perhaps a softly lit bookstore, or a quiet forest at dusk, while a virtual character speaks to them gently, folds a blanket, or simply exists beside them. For many, these are more than relaxation tools. They are emotional surrogates, moments of digital companionship in a fragmented world. This has raised new philosophical questions. Can we call this real care? If it helps you feel seen, supported, or sapphos, it matter whether the voice comes from a friend or a recording? One ethics researcher suggested that ASMR may be a model for future digital empathy. Unlike AI that mimics intelligence, ASMR simulates intimacy. It creates space for feeling, not just function. That makes it deeply human even when it's delivered through a screen. And this is perhaps where ASMR has surprised the world most, not as novelty, but as a blueprint for emotional technology, a way forward that resists cold efficiency in favor of warmth, ritual, and intentional attention. This is especially relevant in the context of care, industries, nursing, mental health, elder support. These are fields where burnout is high, emotional labor is intense, and time is scarce. While ASMR cannot replace human touch, it can supplement it. In some care homes, staff now play ASMR videos in common rooms before bed. Some hospice programs include audio recordings of loved ones whispering affirmations. In schools, teachers play soft-spoken videos to help anxious students re-regulate after a stressful moment. It's not about volume, it's about presence without pressure. And yet, for all this progress, the ASMR community continues to face misunderstanding. Some still label it as weird, overly intimate, or vaguely suspicious. This says more about our discomfort with softness than about the content itself. In a world that prizes productivity, ASMR's gentleness can feel like resistance. But maybe that's exactly what it is. Not just a trend, but a quiet counterculture. A movement that suggests you don't have to push to be worthy. You don't have to perform to be heard. The ASMR creator who softly brushes the mic while asking how your day was isn't just producing content. They're modeling a slower kind of carone that has space for silence, repetition, and imperfection. And viewers, in turn, are not just consuming, they're entering a space where receiving kindness is allowed. For many people, this is a rare thing, and that rarity gives ASMR its power. We often talk about the internet as a place of overstimulation, but perhaps, quietly, it's also become a place of unspoken tenderness. And ASMR may be its clearest language yet. As ASMR matured into a global genre, its aesthetics began to evolve not only in form and style, but in the values it reflected. No longer confined to videos or audio files, ASMR quietly became a kind of philosophia design language, of gentleness influencing everything from architecture to mindfulness apps, even fashion and public space. One of the most surprising developments has been the emergence of ASMR-inspired design. Interior designers have begun referencing ASMR principles when creating calming rooms. Natural textures, slow lighting transitions, acoustics that absorb sharp sound. In one case, a Scandinavian hospital redesigned its waiting rooms to reduce echo and introduce soft ambient soundscapes with subtle tapping and flowing water directly inspired by ASMR techniques. Retailers have also taken note. Some stores now intentionally curate quiet zones where customers can interact with products in hushed environments. No overhead music, just low lighting and the soft rustle of tissue paper. It's not about selling through noise anymore. It's about creating an atmosphere where people feel safe enough to stay. Even fashion has flirted with ASMR. During a 2020 Fashion Week presentation, a designer played ASMR audio of fabrics being touched and sewn instead of using traditional music. The show was streamed online, where viewers commented not on the clothes but on how soothing it was to hear real hands at work. This is part of a larger shift in luxury branding toward tactility and mindfulness, moving away from flash and toward feeling. What we're witnessing, some scholars say, is the quiet softening of digital life. The rise of ambient content, gentle UX, slow media, and voice-first interfaces all point to a growing realization. People are exhausted, not just by noise, but by hyper-efficiency. And ASMR, in its softness, presents a new kind of aspiration, not productivity, but presence. Interestingly, many creators now pair ASMR with intentional living, bringing elements like minimalism, journaling, slow cooking, and plant care into their videos. A 45-minute recording might include someone slowly making tea, folding napkins, and speaking softly about letting go of stress. These aren't how-to tutorials. They are rituals, small invitations to slow down. This blend of ASMR and lifestyle has created a new hybrid genre, soft living content. It doesn't try to impress or entertain in the traditional sense. It just offers a room, a voice, and time to breathe. This approach is resonating across demographics, especially with younger generations who feel caught between burnout and digital overwhelm. And still, even as ASMR expands outward, its emotional center holds steady. The most viewed ASMR videos are still the simplest. Someone brushing a microphone, whispering kind words, or methodically crinkling paper. These are not trends, they are constants. Because at the end of the day, what ASMR offers is not novelty, but safety. Not a thrill, but a return. It's also become deeply interpersonal, especially for creators who have developed long-term relationships with their audiences. Many describe their viewers as family. Some keep notebooks with fan names and favorite triggers. Others create customized videos, whispering subscribers' names or offering affirmations tailored to a specific emotional need. This level of care, even in a digital space, creates a bond that feels surprisingly close to friendship. And yet, unlike influencers who build parasocial relationships based on aspiration or glamour, ASMR creators do something more intimate. They sit down, dim the lights, and say, "You're okay. I'm right here." That message repeated softly and without condition is one of the few things that feels timeless online. Academic fields like media psychology and emotional design are now paying closer attention to this space. Some even propose that ASMR offers a model for future therapeutic interaction, an approach to care that combines low-stakes sensory engagement with emotionally safe narration. It's not therapy, but it's therapeutic. It doesn't replace real support, but it fills a gap that many people, especially the lonely, anxious, or touch-deprived, can feel acutely. All of this points to a quiet truth. ASMR isn't just a sensation anymore. It's a language, a way of saying, "This space is safe. You don't have to do anything. Just be." And as the noise of the world continues, this language becomes not just soothing, but necessary. As the digital landscape grows ever louder, ASMR remains one of the few cultural forces that insists on staying quiet. Not by accident, but by principle. And that quiet, far from being passive, is now being recognized as a deliberate act of resistance against overstimulation, against constant productivity, against a world that rarely lets us pause. We live in an age where attention is a battlefield. Social feeds refresh every second. Notifications pull us in dozens of directions. And in the background, algorithms are optimized to favor what is most extreme, louder, faster, brighter. Yet, amid this endless velocity, ASMR has stayed devoted to stillness. It's the rare genre where slowness isn't a flaw, it's the point. This has given rise to an idea gaining traction in cultural theory: digital restfulness. The notion that certain forms of media can actively reduce stress rather than increase it. ASMR sits at the heart of this concept, not only because it induces physical calm, but because it models a way of being that feels increasingly rare, one that values attention over urgency, softness over spectacle. Some scholars now position ASMR within the framework of slow internet culture. Like slow food or slow travel, it's not about quantity, but quality of experience. And within that quality lies a challenge to modern norms. What if care was more valuable than reaction? What if calm was more powerful than stimulation? In this context, ASMR becomes more than soothing videos. It becomes a philosophy of design, of interaction, of human presence, one in which eye contact is held longer, one in which voices are lowered and words are chosen with care. In this soft space, meaning is not shouted, it's offered. Interestingly, ASMR is also being reinterpreted as a form of mindfulness, particularly by younger audiences who might not engage with traditional meditation. A whispered video, a slow tapping rhythm, a soft monologue about emotional regulation of it works by anchoring attention in the now, not the future, not the inbox, just this moment, right here. And this sense of presence, ironically, is what connects viewers most deeply to one another. ASMR is often described as a solitary experience, watched in the dark, with headphones, in silence. But in reality, it fosters a unique kind of shared humanity, one built not on spectacle, but on mutual softness. Many ASMR creators have reported moments that stay with them forever. A teenager in a war-torn country writing to say a video helped them sleep through the sound of sirens. An elderly woman saying the whispers reminded her of her late sister. A man with chronic pain saying he could finally relax for the first time in weeks. These are not just stories. They are evidence of something rare, digital content that truly soothes. Of course, ASMR is not a miracle. It's not a cure, but it is a gesture. And sometimes, a gesture is enough. There's also something deeply poetic in the fact that ASMR remains, at its core, so humble. Despite its billions of views and growing influence, most ASMR videos are still filmed by individuals, alone in quiet rooms, speaking gently into microphones. It is a genre built not on performance, but on invitation. And the invitation is always the same. Come in, you're safe here. This universality across language, culture, and technology suggests ASMR is tapping into something more elemental. Not just a sensation, not even just care, but a kind of human echoth, feeling of someone being near, without judgment, without demand. It's this echo that keeps people coming back, night after night, year after year, not because the sounds are new, but because the stillness is rare, and perhaps most powerfully, because that stillness allows something most media cannot, a return to the self. In the final stretch of our story, we return to the question that quietly began this whole journey. Why does something so simple, so quiet, touch so many people so deeply? ASMR is, in many ways, the opposite of what the internet was built for. It's not optimized for speed or virality or clicks per minute. It doesn't reward spectacle or conflict. And yet, against all odds, this whispering movement not only survived, it thrived. In a digital landscape designed to capture attention by any means necessary, ASMR instead invites your attention softly and lets you choose. And perhaps that's why it works. When you lie in bed at night, headphones on, and someone you've never met begins to whisper kindly to you, calling you sweetheart, or asking if you've had enough water today, it may seem silly on paper. But in that moment, your nervous system doesn't think it's silly. It leans in, it calms down, it exhales. That's the magic of ASMR. It bypasses logic and reaches something older, something primal. Our need to be noticed gently, to be spoken to as if we matter. Not for what we produce, or how we look, or what we've accomplished, but simply because we exist. And this gentle recognition, in a world so often indifferent or overwhelming, can feel profoundly radical at its best. ASMR is not about triggers or tingles. It's about attention with no agenda. A stranger's voice reminding you that it's okay to rest, that you don't have to do more to be enough, that you can just be. Some historians have suggested that ASMR, as a cultural phenomenon, may one day be seen as a turning point in digital intimacia, shift away from mass engagement towards something more tender and focused. Others argue it's part of a broader emotional reckoning, where people are quietly demanding gentleness in a world that too often equates value with volume. Whatever the case, the ripple effects are already visible. Sleep clinics now ask patients if they use ASMR. Meditation apps borrow its pacing. Designers consult its principles when crafting relaxing interfaces. And all over the world, millions of people whisper back to their screens, alone but not lonely. We end, then, not with a headline or a chart, but with something quieter. A gesture, a breath, a voice in the dark saying, "Hey, I'm here. Let's slow down for a while." That is ASMR. Not a gimmick, not a trend, but perhaps, in its softest form, a new kind of listening. Now that our story has come to a gentle end, let the silence wrap around you like a warm blanket. The room is quiet. The world outside has slowed, and in this moment, you don't need to be anywhere but here. Let your breath soften. Let your thoughts float. You've traveled through stories of stillness, care, and connection, and now there's nowhere else you need to go. The sounds of the day are behind you. The glow of the screen is fading, and what remains is this still space we've created together. So as you drift off, know that you are held in a quiet that belongs only to you. Soft, slow, and safe.